Modern smartphones have fundamentally altered how the human brain allocates attention, gradually reshaping cognitive habits that once relied on sustained focus. The constant presence of notifications, alerts, and visual cues trains the brain to remain in a state of readiness, always anticipating the next stimulus. This condition reduces the mind's tolerance for silence and uninterrupted thought, making deep focus feel uncomfortable or even stressful for many people. Over time, repeated exposure to rapid information switching weakens the brain's ability to concentrate on a single task for extended periods. The brain adapts to scanning rather than reflecting, prioritizing speed over depth. This shift affects not only productivity but also learning, as complex ideas require patience and sustained mental engagement to be fully understood. The psychological mechanism behind this change is rooted in attentional conditioning. Each buzz or vibration signals potential novelty or reward, pulling attention away from the present task. The brain learns that shifting focus often leads to something interesting, reinforcing the habit of distraction and making it harder to resist checking the phone even without a notification. This constant fragmentation of attention can reduce working memory efficiency. When attention is repeatedly interrupted, the brain must reload information each time focus returns to the original task. This process increases cognitive fatigue and decreases overall mental performance, leading many people to feel mentally exhausted despite minimal physical effort. Research in cognitive psychology suggests that multitasking, often encouraged by phone use, is largely an illusion. Rather than performing tasks simultaneously, the brain switches rapidly between them. Each switch carries a cognitive cost, slowing thinking and increasing the likelihood of errors, especially in tasks requiring reasoning or creativity. Smartphone-driven attention shifts also affect emotional regulation. When focus is repeatedly broken, the brain becomes more reactive and less reflective. This can increase impulsivity, making it harder to pause, evaluate emotions, and respond thoughtfully to challenging situations. In educational contexts, reduced attention span can significantly impact comprehension and retention. Students accustomed to constant digital stimulation may struggle with reading long texts or engaging in lectures without checking their devices. This creates a feedback loop where learning feels boring, reinforcing reliance on phones for stimulation. The long-term consequences extend beyond individual productivity. Societies that struggle with collective attention may find it harder to engage in meaningful dialogue, critical thinking, and long-term planning. When attention becomes scarce, superficial information often dominates public discourse. Despite these challenges, the brain remains adaptable. By intentionally reducing phone interruptions and practicing focused attention, individuals can retrain their cognitive habits. Mindfulness, scheduled phone use, and deep work practices help rebuild attentional endurance over time. Ultimately, smartphones are not inherently harmful to attention, but their design often exploits psychological vulnerabilities. Awareness of these mechanisms empowers individuals to use technology deliberately rather than allowing it to dictate how their attention is spent. Smartphones interact powerfully with the brain's dopamine-based reward system, which evolved to motivate behaviors essential for survival. Likes, messages, and new content trigger small dopamine releases, reinforcing the desire to repeat the behavior. Over time, the brain associates phone use with pleasure and anticipation. This process mirrors the psychological mechanisms involved in behavioral addiction. Unlike substance addiction, phone-related dopamine spikes are subtle but frequent, creating a pattern of compulsive checking. The brain begins to crave the reward loop even when the content itself is no longer satisfying. Dopamine does not create pleasure directly but drives motivation and desire. Smartphones exploit this by offering unpredictable rewards, such as unexpected messages or viral content. This unpredictability is especially powerful, as the brain finds variable rewards more compelling than predictable ones. As the reward system becomes overstimulated, baseline dopamine sensitivity can decrease. This means ordinary activities like reading, conversation, or quiet reflection may feel less rewarding. The brain becomes conditioned to expect constant stimulation, leading to boredom and restlessness when the phone is absent. This altered reward sensitivity can also influence mood and mental health. When dopamine-driven habits dominate daily life, individuals may experience anxiety or irritability when unable to access their phones. The absence of stimulation feels like a loss rather than a neutral state. Over-reliance on digital rewards may reduce intrinsic motivation. Tasks once pursued for personal satisfaction or curiosity may feel less appealing without external validation. This shift can affect creativity, learning, and long-term goal pursuit. Social media platforms intensify this effect by combining dopamine rewards with social comparison. Likes and comments serve as social signals, reinforcing behavior while simultaneously increasing self-evaluation. This can create cycles of validation seeking and self-doubt. From a neurological perspective, frequent dopamine stimulation can weaken impulse control. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and self-regulation, struggles to override reward-seeking impulses when constantly challenged by tempting stimuli. Breaking this cycle requires intentional changes in behavior rather than complete abstinence. Reducing notification frequency, limiting app access, and introducing reward delays can help recalibrate the brain's reward system. Understanding how smartphones influence dopamine does not mean rejecting technology entirely. Instead, it highlights the importance of designing habits that protect mental autonomy and allow pleasure to arise from a wider range of experiences. Smartphones have become external memory devices, altering how the brain stores and retrieves information. This phenomenon, known as cognitive offloading, allows people to rely on digital tools instead of internal memory. While convenient, this shift carries psychological consequences. When information is easily accessible online, the brain prioritizes remembering how to find information rather than remembering the information itself. This changes learning strategies, favoring search skills over deep understanding and long-term retention. Although cognitive offloading reduces mental effort, it may weaken memory consolidation. Deep learning requires active engagement, repetition, and emotional connection, all of which are reduced when information is quickly looked up and forgotten. This reliance on smartphones can also affect problem-solving skills. When solutions are immediately available, the brain has fewer opportunities to struggle productively. Cognitive struggle is essential for building flexible thinking and creative insight. In educational settings, constant phone access can disrupt the formation of mental frameworks. Learning becomes fragmented, making it harder to integrate new knowledge with existing understanding. This fragmentation limits higher-order thinking. Memory is closely tied to attention. When phones divide attention during learning, memory encoding suffers. Even brief distractions can significantly reduce recall, as the brain fails to transfer information from short-term to long-term storage. The presence of a smartphone, even when unused, can reduce cognitive capacity. Studies suggest that knowing a phone is nearby occupies mental resources, subtly pulling attention away from the task at hand. However, smartphones can also enhance learning when used intentionally. Educational apps, spaced repetition tools, and digital note-taking can support memory if they encourage active engagement rather than passive consumption. The key psychological factor is intentionality. When phones are used as tools rather than crutches, they complement cognitive abilities instead of replacing them. By balancing internal memory development with external aids, individuals can preserve mental sharpness while benefiting from technological convenience. Smartphones have become deeply intertwined with emotional well-being, subtly reshaping how people experience connection, intimacy, and self-worth. While these devices promise constant access to others, the quality of that connection often differs significantly from in-person interaction. The brain evolved to process social cues through facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, and physical presence, many of which are diminished or entirely absent in digital communication. As a result, frequent online interaction can leave emotional needs partially unmet. Text messages, reactions, and short comments provide signals of acknowledgement but rarely offer the emotional depth required for true bonding. Over time, the brain may register these interactions as incomplete social experiences, leading to a persistent sense of emptiness despite being constantly connected. Loneliness has paradoxically increased in the age of smartphones. Even when surrounded by digital conversations, individuals may feel emotionally isolated because the interactions lack vulnerability and shared presence. The brain's social reward systems respond more strongly to authentic, emotionally rich encounters than to rapid, surface-level exchanges. Social media platforms intensify emotional strain through continuous social comparison. Curated images and success narratives create unrealistic standards that distort perception. The brain, wired to assess social standing, interprets these idealized portrayals as evidence of personal inadequacy, even when logically understood to be incomplete or edited. This comparison culture can erode self-esteem and contribute to anxiety and depressive symptoms. Repeated exposure to others' highlight reels trains the brain to focus on perceived deficits rather than strengths. Over time, this can reshape identity, making self-worth increasingly dependent on external validation. Smartphones also influence emotional regulation by offering constant distraction from discomfort. Whenever boredom, sadness, or stress arises, the phone provides immediate relief. While this avoidance feels soothing in the moment, it prevents the brain from fully processing emotions, weakening long-term emotional resilience. Emotional growth depends on tolerating discomfort and reflecting on internal states. When phones interrupt these moments, emotions remain unresolved. The brain learns to escape rather than adapt, which can increase emotional fragility and reduce coping capacity. Sleep disruption caused by smartphone use further compounds emotional difficulties. Late-night scrolling exposes the brain to stimulation and blue light that interfere with melatonin production. Poor sleep impairs emotional control, heightens reactivity, and increases vulnerability to stress and negative mood. However, smartphones are not inherently harmful to emotional well-being. They can facilitate meaningful connection when used intentionally. Long conversations, voice messages, video calls, and supportive communities can strengthen emotional bonds, especially for those separated by distance or circumstance. Phones can also provide access to mental health resources, educational content, and peer support that might otherwise be unavailable. For many individuals, digital spaces offer validation, understanding, and belonging that are difficult to find offline. The psychological impact of smartphone use depends largely on intention and balance. Passive consumption tends to drain emotional energy, while active, purposeful engagement can enrich it. Awareness of emotional triggers and usage patterns helps individuals regain control. By setting boundaries and creating phone-free spaces for reflection and connection, the brain can recover emotional depth. This allows technology to serve human needs rather than replace them. Ultimately, emotional well-being thrives not on constant connection, but on meaningful presence. Smartphones can support this goal, but only when they are used as tools for connection rather than substitutes for it.